Hey mate, working on the inside of the camper today, which is a big step, so I'm cleaning that out. Ready to start putting in some timber, which is exciting. Putting the first bits of timber on the kitchen side, well, kitchenette, if you'd like to call it a kitchen. It's going to have a small frame around the outside here. These are going to hold up the bench. It's just a small little bench, about 400 wide and as wide as the little inlet there, as you can see. So I'm just measuring up the sides here, the little noggins that are going to hold it all in.
Now, when it comes to cutting things, I have got the skill and dexterity of a 3-year-old. So rather than trying to cut the wood to the angle of the roof first go, I thought it'd be better to make a template from plastic to get it right.
And using the template did give me the confidence that this was at least close to the right angle. I didn't want to have to go and buy another whole sheet of this 3mm plywood and have to try and cut it out all over again, which would suck.
Before I attach the wood, I need to insulate this end of the camper. So I've been diligently collecting human hair from the floor of my wife's salon. It took a while, but after several months I have enough to make these big hairy slabs. And let's face it, what has better insulating properties than a mixture of 112 different people's hair?
So using the template did really pay off in the end. As you can see, this does fit quite well in that little triangle space. So I just attached that straight on over all of the hairy slabs. And I'll just be using these little chrome screws that go into the plywood because it's only 3mm thick. It's going to show up. I can't really put any filler over the screws, so they're going to be little feature screws, if you can call it that. Then I needed to fill out these little battens to bring down the ceiling a little bit further so I can put the insulation in there behind that on the roof as well. So again, I'm marking out another template because there's a few little joins here that I had to cut out of this plywood all over again. So I was just making sure that I got that cut right the first time. So I fit in that little template quite a few times before going back and actually cutting the wood. And as you can see, it fits really well. Back to the insulation.
And you'll notice I do have a mask on for this because, as you know, there's nothing more annoying than getting hair in your mouth.
Now, I really wanted to make sure that all of the ceiling and all of the walls on this end were covered quite well, because the rest of the panels that are surrounding this little tiny trailer are actually insulated panels. So this would be a really big weak point as far as insulation goes. So I wanted to make sure that this was covered quite well, because the tunnel core on the other end has basically no insulation value whatsoever. I'm hoping that there's kind of like a little air gap in between those two sheets, the two skins there, that might give some kind of insulation. I'm not sure if that's going to work or not, but time will tell. I would rather the caravan or the little tiny trailer be quite light rather than cool, because I can just open the doors or the window, and there's going to be fly screens on both ends. Here I'm putting this 1mm ply on the sides here, which was a mistake. I had no door on the trailer yet, so I decided maybe I should start sealing up that front of the trailer before I put any wood on, because all that wood that I put on just there, it started to warp really badly, and you'll see later I actually do replace that. So onto sealing up the trailer and putting some kind of sealant on the sides of the door jamb, as well as a door itself. So I'm going through here and attaching all of the trims to make it look all pretty and make sure that no water goes through between the tunnel core and the door jamb. I'm going to add some trims either side, and you can see here on the top, just to make it look a bit pretty and cover up that steel frame. And just putting in a little template here, temporary brace to hold that in place while the glue dries. You can see that they're looking pretty good there. Adding the final touches after these trims are all cut, gluing them in place with liquid nails on the inside, and I think I used the silicone on the outside of it actually. So after that's all done, it's just a matter of actually fitting on the door and getting a door in place.
I couldn't find a door to fit the camper, so I had to make a custom one. I went to the best place I know to find useless crap people no longer want, Facebook Marketplace. I always recommend meeting strangers from the internet to save money on the items that you're after. And, after a few failed attempts, I did find a bloke with what I needed.
Hey mate, I'm just here to buy your door. Not this one, obviously. It's the one by the garage here. I'll just leave you 50 here. Thanks. After securing the door for $50 from the old grumpy man, I went back to cut that up to size. So it was just a matter of taking two of the ends off, or the end and one of the sides, and cutting the right angles to the right size, and then cutting the excess off, and then joining all of those pieces back up. I make that sound so easy and it looks really quick here, but this took forever and it was really quite annoying to do. But in the end, I got it all together and it's pretty square. It actually fits inside the gap pretty well, not perfectly, but it does fit pretty well and I'm happy with that.
Now here, I'm just pretending to attach the door that I had already attached off camera.
And wow, after doing that off camera, it fits really well. The door actually was not fitted with a handle that had a key or functioned very well, so I had to go and buy a new set to put in the side of the frame. It wasn't too hard, I just managed to file out some of the little bits that were stopping this new piece from going in, and then attaching all of the new hardware as I went along. And had a few difficulties making sure that the lock was functioning properly, but I sorted it all out in the end. It's just a matter of getting the lock barrel in the right spot and lining up with the handles and the striker plate after I put it onto the side wall as well. So putting the finishing screws in there on that side and doing the hole for the striker plate, bending about 3 blades doing this, but got there in the end, and just attaching that striker plate on there. Now it does look pretty tidy from this angle, but I'm telling you that hole is a little bit of a mess. I'm glad the striker plate is there to cover up all of the damage I did.
And after doing lots of little tweaks off camera, it works perfectly on camera, first go.
So after that was done, I actually had to put on a door jamb behind the door because the door's only attached to the frame. So I went through and I used a little bit of timber and put the rubber seal on to keep any of the weather out.
To get all the plywood I needed for the interior, I went to Bunnings with a really long list of sizes to cut, so the unlucky Bunnings guy was all too aware that I didn't own the tools required to do the job I was attempting, which is quite often the case with my projects.
So these are the new pieces I'm cutting for those warped pieces that I put on the sides of the wall there. This is going to be 12mm plywood that I'm attaching here, so it's quite thick. I'm very confident that this isn't going to warp, so just giving it a whole heap of a good sand before I put it on, and I'm actually going to glue it on, as you can see, with the liquid nails as well as some screws as I attach it onto the wall. So that should stop any of the warping, hopefully. If any other liquid or something is spilt in the camper, or we have a leak or something happens along the way, it's going to hopefully stop anything from warping when that happens.
And look at me go, cutting 3 pieces at once. Who's getting cocky now?
Now, when I first started the project, I really had only a rough drawing of what I wanted these bench seats and bed layout to look like. I didn't really have the dimensions of them yet, so I'm kind of winging it as I go and just working things out as I go. So I was sort of measuring things and trying things on one side, and then if I thought it was the right size and it was looking good, I would mirror that on the other side, and that's what I'm doing here, installing these squares which will make up the supports of the bench seat, which is kind of just like a box with a lid, and then obviously they'll have the bed, I guess you call it just like a drop down piece of wood, or a drop down flat piece that actually lays down over the bench seat and creates the bed. And obviously the little toilet setup, ooh, fancy. And just making sure the esky will pull out from under the bench there. It looks good. So I've continued along making the bench seats, measuring out the little 100mm backing plate that will hold the lid, because the mattress that I'm going to get is 100mm wide. It's just a little foam mattress, and it'll fold up behind the bed piece, behind the bench seat there. So it's going to be 100mm wide. That's why I need that little 100mm strip. And just measuring out the bed sections here to make sure they fit within the parameters, and then a whole heap of sanding. Oh my god. There's hours and hours of sanding, back down to 240 grit from 80 grit, and it went on and on and on for days. And I'm going to cut that well and truly short so you don't have to see it. Next was I had to make sure I had some supports in the middle, because that plywood is definitely not going to support people on a bed. So I decided you need handles to lift the lid, and I'll make it 2-in-1. So the slats will fit into the handle across the middle section. Looks good. So I've just started to do one handle at one end and measure it back down to the end of the box itself, and marking out the kind of like the second last handle there before the wall, and then measuring out evenly in between those two, so they kind of looks even, and it spreads the weight even when somebody's laying on the bed. There'll be 5 slats along there, and they'll be made up of I think it was 30mm by 90mm timber, so really strong. There's no way that's going anywhere, as an Aussie would say. Just testing all those handles out, sanding them up nice, making sure they all fit when they go in. And again, more sanding and sanding and sanding. I couldn't believe how much sanding there was. So over sanding, let me tell you. So after this, I wanted to make sure that the slats didn't slip through into the box and out and fall down, basically. So I decided to add a strip along the back end of the handles here, so that they fit in perfectly to each side of the handle, and holds it up and it won't slip either way and come out. So this is just a bit of the plywood that was left over, so it was handy.
And by zooming in, I think it really does help emphasize my point.
So just putting in these last few strips along behind the handles here, and making sure they're nice and secure, and it's actually going to help secure the box as well, the structural integrity of the box. Ooh, big words now. And more sanding again, and we're reaching into the box, I don't want to cut myself on that. And it was time to attach the hinges on and make sure this lid stays where it's supposed to be.
And every great tradesman lets the wood fall on their head to ensure a good finish.
Super happy with that check, and went through and finished off the rest of these hinges, and gave it a little test, make sure it fits, closes nicely. Then I lined up the front and actually secured that back strip on where the hinges are. Beautiful, look at that, just like I bought one. I've even got a toilet lid. So that little flap there on the end of the toilet is basically so in the middle of the night we don't have to lift up the entire bed. If you need to have a little tinkle, you can just lift up that little flap and go for your life. And now I'm just going through and putting another strip along the back, which will hold the bed section that folds down. So this is going to be another 100mm section where the mattress can sit on top of behind the bed section and behind the bench, and then allow for that mattress to be there and still be able to fold down. So the hinges will attach to this.
I also think it really helps you to focus when you wear a shirt under your hat to cover your neck like a Legionnaire. Wow, look at that focus.
So just attaching that little strip there now, covering up the bottom hinges, and then the other hinges for the bed section will attach onto the top of that. So you can see I'm pushing that against that now, giving it a little test, and on the other side, making sure it all fits together nicely. And it looks alright, so I'm just winging it and adding the hinges on, seeing if it'll all fit once it's attached. So those few hinges had to go on, all looks good. Putting that last one on there now.
And now the bench is perfectly secure to sit on.
It's all looking good, pretty comfortable, and there's lots of room to sit on, and the bed seems to function okay. So happy with that. Moving on to do the other side, which is basically just a mirror of the other side, same sort of thing. Just going through and putting those strips on and the hinges in place, making sure everything fits right and fits really nice. Covering up the hinges with that strip for the bed section, and making sure the lid opens perfectly. Testing out the lid, and it's looking pretty good.
And if you do a project like this, I recommend working in fast mode like this, so it doesn't take you as long and you get to sit down and relax quicker.
After the hinges were all attached, I put the slat in just to test it out and make sure everything fit once it's all locked in place. So laying both of the bed sections down, looks good, nice and sturdy, and giving it the old lay down test. It was pretty good. It felt really solid, and I've got enough room for me. I can actually fit in this thing quite comfortably. You can see that's kind of the finished product, completely raw of course. I haven't done any sort of treatment to the timber, but it's coming along nicely. And I've even got little bins here in the under the seat, under that bench seat. It all folds down, lovely, look at that.
By some miracle, all of the pieces fold down together and meet perfectly.
And now you can see that whole section in there becomes one big bed, and there'll be slats underneath all that to support it. And as I said, that little section opens up and you can use the toilet if you really have to in the middle of the night, so you don't have to leave the camper and pack up the whole bed, or pack up the whole bed. Very happy with how it's all turned out. There's obviously a lot more to do as far as treating the timber goes, but as you can see, it is all functioning properly. We've got boxes there for storage. I've got seats to sit on now, full long bench seats. Couldn't be happy with how it's turned out, to be honest, and just giving it the one more test, putting the slat in the middle and making sure it's all secure. There's going to be 4 more slats, as I pointed out there, one on each end and a few in the middle, which will support this entire bed section and anyone that's on top of it. Another lay test, and it's almost done. I can't believe I can lay down in this already. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.